Got it.
So I don't know you at all. This is a little different than the other interviews I've conducted who have been like my friends who have also gone to top level schools. I myself am going to Dartmouth this fall. I told you I was rejected from Stanford, so I'm only a little jealous of you, but just start off, tell me and kind of everyone about yourself. Like where are you from? You're going to Stanford. I kind of spoiled that already, but
I
what are you
am
going
not
there
going to
for?
Stanford.
Wait, what?
I'm not going to Stanford.
Oh, you're not going to Stanford, you just got in.
I'm not. I got in. I rejected Stanford.
I'd love to hear that you rejected Stanford. Okay, well, perfect. This is great because I'm just going to be learning with everybody. But you got into Stanford. That's what we're here for.
Yeah, so my name is B. I'm from Yorktown, Virginia,
Okay,
and I will be attending Williams College this fall as a prospective psychology and economics major.
love it. So you're from Virginia, you said. If you want to touch on sort of the activities you've done throughout high school, let's just start there.
Um, Honestly, this is the part where it's a little confusing as to how I got into Stanford because um, I would say that most of my quote unquote like impressive activities came during my junior year, not really so much during my freshman and sophomore years. I actually didn't put down that I did any activities in my freshman year. Um, my extracurriculars, I had like two, I think, that started during COVID. One thing is I got involved in a local nonprofit in 10th grade, and that's kind of where my spike was.
Yep.
So I am interning with them this year. I started a chapter of the organization at my school, where I still run that as president, but I started that last year. And we've won a couple of like international grants and awards and stuff. So that has like from our parent affiliate and stuff. So um, that was probably my main thing. I also um, volunteered at my church and I led like the youth band. Um, and I'm part of Five Scholars. So it's like a community-based organization for first generation low income students of color. And I also am like the secondary caretaker for my siblings. I have three younger siblings.
Yeah.
So that's something also that's important to me.
Super
So
cool.
yeah.
Yeah. I liked all what you talked about. That was a great kind of introduction to what you are and what you value and kind of your activities. And I like how you touched on at the very start. You're like, most of my activities are from junior year and beyond. And I'm the same way. The other people I've interviewed, you're my third interview so far. And all the other people I interviewed were like, I wasn't even really thinking about college freshman and sophomore year. But
Hmm.
so I'm glad you brought that up. I'm glad you touched on the spike. Love to dive deeper into that later and kind of get into your activities a little more in depth and talk about your kind of why you did each one. And, we'll get to that later. But for now, imagine you could go back and tell yourself something freshman year. And I kind of want to learn about your mentality freshman year, right? Because for me, I wasn't thinking about college. For the people I've interviewed so far, they weren't thinking about college. Where were you freshman year? What were you thinking? And then now, what would you go back and tell yourself if you could kind of, I mean, obviously you got into Stanford, so it worked out pretty well, but if there's anything you'd like to tell yourself.
Surprisingly worked out very well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was in ninth grade pretty intent on going to William and Mary. It's like 20 minutes from my house.
Yeah.
Um, and that was the pretty much the only college I knew. I um when I had like a phase when I was like in eighth grade where I'm like, I'm gonna go to Harvard, but that was like a reach for
I
me.
think
And
everyone has that kind of phase. Yeah.
yeah, it was for like the prestige. I didn't really know, like I knew nothing about the application process. I didn't even know like how financial aid worked. I knew absolutely nothing, but I did know that I wanted to do something with my life and I knew that college was going to open up a lot of opportunities that like my parents having not gone to college didn't have to them and stuff. Um and so I just kind of backtracked from there. So I'm like, okay, I want to go to a top college because I want to have like a really good career lined up for me. So like what is the steps that I'm gonna need to take to get there? And so a lot of it came from like talking to friends who also wanted to go to like top colleges And then also looking into applying to different like community-based organizations, like the one I told you about, Thrive Scholars.
Yep.
That was one that they completely taught me like everything that I knew about the application process. And that was the summer from junior to senior year. That's when I actually started getting serious about like applying to college, applying for financial aid, and kind of like learning about all that. Yeah.
Yeah. Like I said, pretty much everyone in the same sort of boat that I've talked to. Like, yeah, maybe we all had that phase in eighth grade where like, oh, we're just gonna go to Harvard, like it'll be all good. But yeah, mostly no one's really thought about it until like junior to senior year of summer. But who this video is kind of aimed towards is those families and like the kids, like the freshman, sophomore, who are already kind of thinking about college, but they might be in the same boat where they're like, what's the Common App? What's financial aid? Like, how do I even apply to schools? So that's what kind of this is for. And I mean, of course, it's also kind of some hopefully like juniors going into their senior year kind of listen to it this summer. And so, I mean, it's kind of for everyone. But so I'd like to, I guess, go now into how do you approach building a school list? So you're going to Williams, but you got into Stanford. Did you apply anywhere early action, early decision? Kind of talk me through that whole process for you.
Um, I wrote basically all my applications the day of, which is something I would not like. There are so many better ways to approach the college application process, but
Yeah.
probably spent more time building my list than I did writing my supplemental essays, which worked out for me in the long run, but it's not something that I find is very common that people have very like they're very successful with. But I did build a very strong college list. So I only applied to 4 colleges. And then like I got freaked out in January that I wasn't gonna get in anywhere. So I applied in like February to like one that had like rolling admission. But um I applied to University of Richmond because I was really interested in their Richmond Scholars Program. Um and it was in state. And then I also applied to Harvard. I did not get in. Stanford, I did get in, and then Williams because I attended Williams's fly-in program and just really liked the culture of the campus a lot and their financial aid. That was probably the biggest factor in building my college list. Um, I knew that with like my financial situation and stuff, I wasn't going to be able to get a full ride anywhere, but because like my parents make too much to qualify for like complete financial aid, but too little to be able to pay like all the tuition that they're going to be expected to pay because it was a complicated situation. So I was looking into ones schools that had like really generous financial aid policies, and then also ones that also offered some sort of like merit scholarship. So that was why University of Richmond was a good choice for me because they offer both
Yeah.
100% need based, like they cover all your need, and they give merit scholarships on top of that.
Yeah, I love
So
that approach. And I love how you mentioned like you spent more time building your school list than actually writing the essays, which I was almost in the exact opposite case. Like my mentality, I applied to like 22 schools and it was kind of just like apply to all of them and then spend all the time writing the essays. But so like this kind of podcast is for a program and kind of based out of like a program that helps kids with college admissions. And like an emphasis of it is school list is very important. Like if you spend the time building your school list and actually doing the research and figuring out why each school should be on your list, then when it actually comes time to write essays for that school, you're gonna have a lot better idea of why you even want to go to that school in the first place. So I guess the natural place to go next is to talk about essays. I got a bunch of your Stanford essays pulled up here and they're all excellent. I was kind of reading through them. I'm like, okay, what does it take to get into Stanford? And I'm like, well, this is obviously what they're all really good. So Stanford has a little bit of like a unique, I guess, essay structure because they have like 6 short answers and then a couple longer ones. So I guess first we can just start general. And what was kind of your process for approaching essay topics, coming up with ideas? I know you said you wrote them all in one day, but you still had to kind of have like a idea
I
going in.
did plan them out before that one
Planned them out
day.
before. Okay.
Yeah,
Planning's
I
the
was
hardest part.
just
Writing's
yeah, I
easy.
just didn't know how to write it until like the adrenaline rush came.
Yeah.
Um, I just kind of I really like learning random facts, and so I always try to just like rant about those random facts to whoever will listen. So I kind of just took my little passions and infused them into the essay without like I kind of was like, okay, I already talked about like volunteering in one of my essays. So even though that is a big part of like my application, I didn't want all my essays to be about volunteering or even more than one. So I tried to show like a new piece of myself in each of the essays. So like I connected my passion for like um, feminism and advocacy in the essay that I wrote about like the historical event that you wish you'd
Yeah.
witnessed. And I talked about, I actually read a book over the summer through the same organization that I talked about. And one of the essays in there was like about Lama Linche and stuff. And I got really interested in that. So I connected that to um, like my application for Stanford and stuff. And so I did that for a couple of my essays where I just put like little things that are mentioned in my extracurriculars that I can kind of tie back and show how it's like connected to like my cohesive self or whatever. So
Yeah.
that's yeah.
You mentioned so many good things and all that. It's hard for me to even like respond and kind of like address all the good things you said, but like a couple things stood out to me. You said how you first of all just love consuming facts. Like you love kind of like learning like that, and it shows in your essays, right? And then I also love how you said each kind of essay shows like a different side of you, right? Like you wrote about volunteering here, but then something else here, because you don't want to like admissions officers kind of get it after like the first essay on a topic. They're like, okay, this is them, but you're showing all these different sides of yourself. It's like a six-sided die, and you're like each side like represents a different face of your life. And I think that's just so interesting, especially like reading through these stories you're telling, because you're not just telling the admissions officers like, hey, I'm really interested in learning. I like consuming random facts. I volunteer. You're telling like you're showing them, and it's so so good. So yeah, just huge props on your essays, and I think there's a lot to learn from like your just 2 minute spiel right there for anyone that's listening. Next, I mean, we can kind of go wherever with it if we want to go back into your activities, or we can talk about kind of your honors section. I didn't look into that at all. So
Okay, yeah.
whatever you,
We can talk about honors real quick. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I just have to pull that up and see what I did put down. It was hard to narrow down what honors I wanted to include. But ultimately I kind of decided like I had a bunch of honor roll stuff and like stuff that I got for taking the PSAT, but I decided not to put those down because I got some advice from people that were like, with your SAT score and your GPA, they're obviously going to know that you got something for it. So like putting that down is kind of redundant versus like someone who maybe didn't have the opportunity to take the SAT or something, them getting like commended scholars for their PSAT, that would probably be an honor that would be more necessary to put.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I put down some of the honors that I got for my nonprofit that I volunteer with. I'm gonna pull that up. And so I kind of took advice from one of my friends. Um, I saw her application, how she wrote her honors, where she kind of put a little bit of a description. I didn't even think about doing that until I saw that she did that. Because there's not really a description section in your honors, but some of
Mhm.
these are very like specific to like a local like thing that it wouldn't make sense just to list that versus some are like nationally recognized.
Yeah.
So I kind of had to like contextualize some of them as to like how they're important. So like my state does like a creative writing contest each year. Um and like I won first place in my school, which like wouldn't seem like that impressive, but this is the essay that beat like at least 10 or more applicants and stuff. And so it was like really competitive in terms of like my school and stuff because it was like the AP English classes all had their students submit work. So it was I kind of explained that a little. Then I put that I was a National Hispanic Scholar because I felt like that was something interesting to add about like my identity and stuff because
Yeah.
like I'm mixed race. And I did list like all my ethnicities in the Common App, but just having something there to show like my connection to my heritage, I felt like was important to add since my school doesn't offer any cultural like affiliated groups or whatever. And then I think probably my most impressive award was the one that I won for with my nonprofit. So I with my club, I led a service project where we created like fidget toys for the special education classrooms in the elementary schools that were part of our district. And we made like over 300 fidget toys, and I had to teach like 12 people how to crochet. And I really wanted to write my essay on this, but I ultimately decided against it because I felt like it was less compelling of a topic for me to talk about than like it would be something I would want to write in my like supplemental. So I did end up writing that in my University of Richmond supplement. But it was so we got like a really big shout out at like our international on the international level and stuff, and the international organization at their award ceremony they mentioned that we were the runner up, and so I included that, and that was beating like almost 30 different affiliates from across the world, which was pretty impressive that a project that I started
Yeah.
was there. But yeah, I definitely had to describe that a little bit because otherwise no admissions officer would look at that and be like, oh, I know what that is. So I had to kind of describe like, oh, this is how many affiliates I beat. This is like my role in the thing. So I just said that I led it and we beat 27 affiliates.
Yeah. I mean, again, so much good advice in there. It's hard for me to even like kind of collect it all and summarize it back out. But I mean, I kind of like just letting you lead because you're doing a great job at discussing through everything. You mentioned describing the awards a little bit because, like you said, the admissions officers aren't going to just like understand some random award that you throw on there. You kind of have to give it a little bit of a backstory. And I also like your point about how you didn't include any national merit stuff. In the last interview I did, it was with one of my friends. We're both national merit finalists, but he's like, that doesn't really even matter that much because they already see our ACT, they already see our grades. So like it ties back to earlier when we talked about like different facets of you and like you're trying to show all these different elements of you in a concise story. So I love that. Great description of the honors.
You definitely don't want to reiterate something that's already been put across. So like honestly, I probably didn't really need to submit my SAT score. I did end up doing it anyways, which was probably a waste of money, but because of my GPA and stuff, like again, it was just sort of redundancy. So like if someone with a really high SAT score has like a lower GPA for I don't know, some reason or another, like maybe the school has less grade inflation or something, then maybe it would make sense to add like your like submit your SAT score just to show like proof of your academic ability or whatever. But for me, that was probably less of a factor. I feel like it was just more redundancy.
So then did Stanford actually make you send in your SAT? Because like for ACT, everything I can just like fill it out and like I don't have to actually submit one for like money. I can just, in the
For
comment.
free.
What'd you say?
You could do it for free, or do you mean like you just self
Yeah,
report?
like just self-report. But I didn't like so
I wasn't forced to, but I just did because I wasn't sure if they would believe my self-reporting
oh yeah.
or whatever. So I didn't want to have to end up like sending it later down the line. So I did it while I knew that I could like pay for it up front. And it wasn't like too bad to send, but
Yeah,
yeah.
that makes sense. And obviously I saw your score and it was really good. So might as well flex it a little bit. And then I guess if we'd like to kind of go into classes, grades, stats wise. So what was your ACT then? Or wait, did I say ACT? SAT?
My SAT was a 1570 super scored. Um, the first time I took it, I got a 1510 with a 730 in math and a 780 in reading. And then the second time I took it, it was basically flipped. I got a 730 in reading, and a 790 in math. And what I kind of did for both of these was I knew reading and writing was my strong suit. And I'd gotten the same exact score every single year I took the PSAT. So, and I got the same exact score the first time I took the SAT because it correlated just basically 40 points. So, I knew I was basically set on that. So, the next time when I went into it, I had only studied math, so my like reading score noticeably declined.
Yeah.
Um, but because all my universities that I applied to super scored, it wasn't really a problem. So um, I recommend if people are applying to schools that super score, and a lot of them do, to focus on one section at a time because then you'll maximize the amount of points you're going to get.
That's again such a good tip. I love that you said that because of course, yeah, like if you already have a high score in one, like you don't need to slave away trying to get more, like keep it the same when it doesn't really matter. It's a super score, right? So go focus on
Yeah.
the other. Okay, so really good SAT. What about grades? How many AP classes did you take? What was your unweighted GPA? What was your weighted GPA?
So are you talking about like you want me to know like up to my junior year, or do you want to know like all of them?
We can talk about all of them. I mean, like obviously the ones you're taking right now don't have much of an effect on the schools you got into because you're in them
Yeah,
right now. But
yeah,
so I guess yeah, if you want to break it up and say these are all the ones I took the junior year, or
yeah.
even like numbers wise, like how many you
Yeah,
when
so overall I took 13 AP classes, but my school does offer quite a bit. Probably about half of the APs we offer are online through Virtual Virginia, but um, like we still offer like at least 20 or more. So I took advantage of that. And I took one my freshman year because that was all we're allowed to take. But I had a couple of other weighted classes that I took. So I was ranked like number one during that first year, tied with like a ton of other people
yeah
because freshman GPA. But I consistently got A's, and then sophomore year I took two APs. And again, that was pretty much all we're allowed to take without taking like summer school to get ahead. And then junior year I took four, which was pretty on par with the other students who were in my sort of academic standing at school. I managed to get all A's in that as well. And then senior year, I challenged myself and took six APs. Instead of taking Calc AB, then Calc BC, which is what most students, well, all of the students basically at my school do, I skipped Calc AB. So I'm in BC this year. So this was my first B that's been on my transcript. Um, but that being said, like so it was on my transcript when it was sent to Stanford and Harvard and all that kind of stuff. So I guess it kind of shows that like you don't need a completely perfect, transcript. Like I took it's probably the second hardest course load at my school. The first hardest course load being the students who are in like a specialty STEM program and stuff. So that I did talk to regional admissions officers from each of the respective schools where I got in, and they did say that they were aware of the program and stuff, but they know that not everyone is interested in STEM. So I took the most rigorous course load that I could for my interest, which was social like studies and humanities. Um, and my weighted GPA was a 4.67, and my unweighted is a 3.98,
yeah somewhere around
something
there
like
probably.
yeah.
Again, I'm gonna sound like a broken record. So much good stuff. Most notably, like towards the end, you were saying, like, yeah, maybe you didn't take the most rigorous possible course load for what your school offers, but that's because the most rigorous course load didn't align with your interests and it didn't align with your potential major, which is, I think, a big factor that a lot of people miss when applying to college, right? Like I myself am going for math and computer science. So it would be easy to think like, oh, I just need to take all the APs I can. I need to take, it doesn't matter the subject, like AP Lang, AP Lit, AP Gov, like I just need to take them all. Where mostly colleges care more about the subjects that you're taking that align to your interests. So like for me, it would be more like AP Computer Science, AP Calc and stuff. And then in the case of, you said you got a B and it's the first B on your transcript. Well, they can see, first of all, that you're challenging yourself and doing something that most students at your school aren't doing. You're taking BC before you do AB or without doing AB. And also that's not exactly aligned with your interest. And that kind of goes with story and path. So yeah, it was a great breakdown of your grades.
Yeah, and it also did kind of align with some of my extracurriculars. So I also am the historian of my school's chapter of our Math Honor Society, which definitely does not at all align with my major or whatever. but I did write in one of my supplementals about just how much I was interested in like math and patterns and stuff. And there's definitely like some application in business, which is what I plan on going into. So it it just like you don't need to really have this cohesive, perfectly written out story of like, okay, I'm a like you said, like I'm a mathematics person who only takes STEM stuff, all this stuff. But like you could be really interested in computer science and then also be like a really talented writer. And like I feel like that will just show in your application that like there's more to you than what meets the eye because like in a lot of these colleges, they're not just going to make you take classes in your major. They want to know that you can succeed in classes that are outside your major because a lot of them do have writing requirements or like even if you're a STEM major, you have to take humanities classes or something. I know Harvard has some rules and Stanford does too. So
Yeah, I
it's
love
another
that perspective. And because like obviously each application is unique in its own way. And what you're trying to show is that you're a high level learner. So whatever you can do to display that is obviously best. So like you said, you're interested in math and patterns, like you write an essay about that, they can see that and they can see how that because you said economics and psychology, right?
Mhm.
But then business, like it's all pretty much it's like under the umbrella of like a bunch of interconnected subjects. I personally love economics and psychology because there's like, I mean, obviously economics, that's like pretty much just applied math, but it had like there's such like correlation through everything, and you're showing you have that interdisciplinary knowledge. You can combine it. And again, I picked the word show because you did show them. You weren't just like telling them. You did such a good job of like all your stories and combining all your activities together.
Yeah, I was going to do like the route that everyone, well, not everyone, I guess I should say, a lot of people do go the route where they'll connect their personal statement to their future career path, or like their intended major and stuff, which I think fits for some people. Like my friend did one about like engineering, um, but for me that just it didn't really work that way. And so I guess that's another thing, like there's really no formulaic route for getting into a lot of these colleges. It's kind of just like overall just I guess admissions officers just kind of know when they see a standout application. It doesn't really follow XYZ formula. So like
Yeah.
for me, I didn't talk about my future aspirations at all. I think the only way any of these colleges knew what I wanted to do was by looking at like intended career and intended major and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's great perspective. It's kind of also been echoed throughout the several interviews I've done where it's like it's kind of ironic that the point of these interviews is to show what an Ivy League or a top 20 or in your case like a top 3, top 4. I don't know what Stanford's ranked precisely right now, but it's
Number two.
yeah, no, oh, even better. So we're trying to show like an exact template, but there is no template to fall into. It's unique to everyone and everyone has their own sort of path, which you have to uniquely display in your own application to stand out. But I will say there is a lot of varied interest and they do appreciate that, but there is like a sort of case where you can just have such a big spike that it doesn't really matter what the other stuff you did was. Like in my case it would be math, right? Like I'm really into math. So if I dedicated my entire high school career to only getting good as good at math as I possibly could, and I was doing like research with professors at local universities, I was placing in these national competitions, then yeah, they probably don't care about like if I took AP Lang or not or AP Lit or not, because like the spike is so heavy. They're like, yeah, this guy's obviously going to be a standout applicant. But like you said, that's not the case for everyone. And sometimes there is a balance, especially if that's what you're interested in. Like for me, I think it would have been hard for me to just go fully into math like that. Like I really appreciate math and I enjoy doing math, but there's so many other subjects and things I like to do. So I think a lot of people get stressed out about the spike. It's something you can take advantage of if it's right for you, but it's also something you kind of got to see if you're a type to fit in that mold.
Right. And I think one of the models that I looked at when I was looking at like extracurriculars and figuring out like what I wanted to do in my junior year was like the multi-spike model. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but like instead of being well-rounded or having one spike, you have two or three spikes, which kind of aligns with the Common App, allowing you to put two or three interests down
Mhm.
and stuff. Um, so like for me, I'm really interested in like working with people. So my work with like nonprofit shows that. but I'm also really interested in like being creative and creative stuff. And so I have a lot of like awards that are from that. And so that just kind of like one could be directly related to my major, the other one not so much, but both of them combined, I have a really like strong application regarding those two things. And so that just kind of adds dimension to my thing. Like I met someone when I went to the admitted students event at Stanford, who was really interested in physics, which was what they were planning on like majoring in, but then also music and had a big spike in like music too. So I thought that was interesting, to have these really, really different interests, but at the same time, they're really strong in like the application. So I think it's just really important to just not focus so much on am I doing everything right to get into this one college, but more so, am I doing everything right by me that's going to end up getting the best result for me? Because at the end of the day, like Harvard, Stanford, Princeton, like these are really big names and they can offer you a lot of opportunities. But if you aren't going to take advantage of those opportunities because you're not in a school that's a good fit for you, then like where are you going to be? So
Yeah.
that's why I personally chose a school that was a better fit for me, even though it really pained me not to have that name recognition when I walk across the stage and they announce what school I'm going to at my graduation, for them not to say Stanford and to have everyone think that I'm going to William and Mary because I say Williams.
Yeah.
But it was just honestly such a good fit for me. Like I loved like the smaller class size and like the financial aid. And so like that's just kind of my 2 cents on the whole admissions thing.
That's such a powerful statement. And that's such a powerful action. You're right. Like when I'm thinking of what college, I got into Vanderbilt and I got into Dartmouth. And I was like weighing them over and over. And I actually really struggled to kind of pick one. And like a lot of it is kind of like this subtle, like you got into an Ivy League, you gotta go type like thing in the back of my head, which you try to avoid because that's obviously not it. Like the name recognition does not matter as much as fit. And ultimately that I feel like ended up being the best fit for me. It also ended up being the one with the slightly better name recognition. I mean, they're pretty close in terms of prestige, but yeah, such a powerful statement that you went against the grain of like, oh, I'm going to Stanford. Look at me. I mean, that's what I was saying at the beginning. I was like, wow, super impressive. You're going to Stanford. I didn't even know. And you completely go against the grain and look for a place that's a better fit. So, yeah, powerful lesson to be taken from that. Because ultimately, the school you're better fit at is going to be the one you perform better and then go on to do better things.
Right. And I think another thing is like I heard once before, like the people who like it, if you get into an Ivy League and decide not to go, you're gonna end up just as good as a place, in like a better place, like a good place for like when you graduate college and stuff, than your counterpart who decided to go to Harvard. Because at the end of the day, like if you get into a top college, it's because they know you're going places and you're going to go places regardless of where you end up going to college. So um, that's just another thing to consider. Like, yes, you will get those opportunities, but if you're the type of person to get into Harvard, then you're also the type of person to seek out those opportunities regardless of what school you go into and kind of make that path for yourself.
You're so right. The student you are will not change at what college you go to, but
Hmm.
obviously some colleges are going to be a lot better fit for you to actually be that student you want to be. And I think that's kind of like the beauty of the application process. I know it may seem random to a lot of people and it may seem kind of like a crapshoot, but ultimately the schools you get into are the ones you're fit at. The schools you apply to know what they're looking for in applicants. They know what sort of applicants are going to thrive. So they let those applicants in. And I think it may be like you apply to 20 schools like I did and you get rejected from more than half of them. But like the ones you did get into are the ones where the school thinks you're the right fit. And that's the most important thing. More than name, prestige, recognition. Are you a fit? And yeah, so for any families listening to this right now, I feel like this is going to be super helpful because they're like, oh, if it's a parent, they might be like, oh, I really hope my kid gets into an Ivy League school or like Stanford or MIT and anything on that tier. And when you're like a living example of like you can get into that and you'd be like, no, I don't think I even need that because I'm me and I am gonna be great where no matter where I go.
Right. And also, like going off what you said about like it doesn't really matter about like name recognition, prestige. I do want to clarify that there is a big distinction between name recognition and prestige.
That's true.
Um, Name recognition is like, the instant, like, oh, you go to that school. And a lot of times it happens for the big sporting schools, or like members of like the Ivy League or whatever. But prestige is just actually a measure of like how well those graduates are going to do in the real world and how well employers respect graduates like with this degree and stuff. And so like Williams, I've heard from professors at Stanford when I visited and asked them about like when I was still making my decision, they're like Williams is just as prestigious as Stanford. Like pretty much any college that's like a top 30 is going to be basically like on the same in the terms of like, getting a job with like your employers and stuff. But will they all have the same name recognition? Probably not, especially for like the liberal arts colleges. Like no one at my school knows what Bowdoin is,
Yeah.
but I know a lot of employers really respect that school. So it's just kind of like don't be afraid to look into colleges that you've never even heard of. I did not know what Williams was until this summer when I met with an admissions officer from there and he was like, oh, apply to Windows and Williams, the flying program. And so like I was scared at first to apply there because I was like, ooh, what if I end up going here? No one knows what the name of the school is. I didn't even know what the name of the
Yeah.
school was. But now like I'm gonna matriculate this fall and I'm really in love with the school and stuff. So
Yeah. No, it's another good lesson. Like I knew about Dartmouth before applying, but I wasn't like super familiar at all. And I honestly did not think I'd be a fit. I'm like Dartmouth, kind of like a low tier Ivy. Like I don't know what they even do there. It's more like a liberal arts kind of college. And then I visited like the admitted student day. I'm like, holy cow, like this is definitely the place where I should be. So it's weird how it all shakes out. And like you said, like Williams, you had no idea. Like you're like, oh, what if I have to go there? And then you picked it over Stanford. And then I
yeah.
think a good example of the name recognition versus prestige at like a super high level, like U Chicago is one of the most like prestigious schools in the country, but half the people that you talk to probably won't even like U Chicago. Like I feel like that's just
Penn
not a
State
very common
school.
school
Yeah.
to know about. Yeah. So time's winding down here. I'd love if you had one last thing to say. I mean, you've already been given such good advice, but if you kind of want to reemphasize anything or just tell everyone that's going to be all be all right, because I guess
It will be all right. I I helped many of my friends shotgun 20 plus schools. One of my friends applied to like 30 and she's going to Harvard. So like at the end of the day, like you need to decide what is going to be the best route for you. Are you going to apply to 20 plus schools like Jack, or are you going to apply to like 4 schools or less like me? Like you just got to decide what's right for you and what you feel and just spend time falling in love with the schools that you apply to and stick by your decision. And that I feel like will serve you the best.
such great parting advice. I'll just leave it right there. I won't overstep anything you just said. Thank you so much for doing this. You provided a lot of tremendous insight because it's a different perspective than a lot of people I've been talking to who are like me kind of and go to my school and kind of all have the same mindset about college. So this was super refreshing, a super unique perspective that also is kind of similar. So a lot of great information out there for any families. Thank you so much for coming.
Bye. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, have a nice day.
You too.